All right, in this video, I'm gonna go through exactly what the questions are, exactly the things that you need to know and you need to answer in your hearing. This applies to both an informal and a formal hearing. Either way, I'm gonna go through exactly what you need to know. But first, let's talk about sort of the format, the structure of these. Now, an informal is, like it sounds, less formal. And that is because it is you and a Secretary of State hearing officer there. That's it. Now, if you have a lawyer, obviously, your lawyer's there. And if you needed an interpreter can go too. But it's typically, you, the petitioner, and your attorney, if you have one, and then a hearing officer. In a formal hearing, there is those same people, the hearing officer, as well as you, as well as your attorney if you have one, but there's also a Secretary of State attorney. You can kind of think of this as like a prosecutor. They represent the Secretary of State. They're not the hearing officer making decisions. They're a facilitator, perhaps even considered to be a prosecutor for the Secretary of State. That's the person you oftentimes need to watch out for. And big difference is that at a formal hearing with an attorney, your attorney gets to ask you the questions. It is huge because like this, we're going to go through what the questions are and then what your answers would be. And so I get to ask you the questions that you already know are coming, and you get to give the answer that you already know. But if you don't have a lawyer at a formal hearing, it's a Secretary of State attorney answering questions, that prosecutor type person asking you the questions. And that's a big difference, having somebody who's on your side, who you've paid to help you with this, ask you questions, or somebody who's adversarial or perhaps adversarial asking you questions. So big difference there. But either way, this is essentially the questions that are going to be asked and that you're going to need to answer. This is exactly what we use to prep our clients when they've hired us to do a hearing. Now, the answers I can't give you. The answers are contained within your history. The answers are contained within your past DUI files, your driving record. The answers are contained within the treatment you've done and the evaluation that you've completed. All those answers exist. They're there. And so now you need to make sure that the things that you say in the hearing match all that paperwork. That is your job here. Any inconsistency is a basis for you to be denied at this hearing. So you must be accurate, you must be consistent, and you don't get pen and paper there. You got to memorize these things. And so you need to know a lot of details about every DUI arrest. That may not be so difficult if you have one DUI arrest and it was a few years ago, but I've done hearings for people that had DUI arrests 40 years ago. And we need to figure out these things. What was the exact date? What was the exact time of the DUI arrest? What did you drink prior to that, or consume, as applies to drugs as well? What did you consume prior to that? How much? What types of drinks were they? Over what time frame did you consume that? Were there any illegal drugs consumed? Any medications that you were on? Prescription, over-the-counter medications that you were on? How many miles did you drive before you were stopped? Where were you going? Right? Why were you stopped in the first place? Were you involved in an accident? Did you feel intoxicated? This can be a trick question. People have a tendency to say no. You almost certainly want to say yes, right? This is not the time to win your DUI case. That happened years ago. Now you're trying to sort of admit it, fall on your sword, if you will, and the Secretary of State's going to look more favorable upon that. What was your blood alcohol concentration at the time? What was your weight at the time? What had you eaten that day? A lot of questions, a lot of details about your DUI arrest. And again, it may have occurred decades prior. So you're going to need those answers. And the answers matter. You can't just make it up. In fact, let me blow your mind here for a second. The Secretary of State can calculate if the things you're saying are correct, especially when it comes to consuming alcohol. That's why they ask you your weight. They know, male or female. Here's what your weight was. You told them you drank this. You told them how much. You even told them the number of ounces that you estimated it to be. Over what period of time? There's an actual calculator where they can determine your BAC. And is that, or a range of your BAC? And is that consistent with what the police reports say? Is that consistent with what you're telling them at the time? They can trip you up, and they're very, very good at it. So you need to know those things, and you need to be accurate. And you have to do this for every single DUI. So if you have multiple, this becomes that much harder. And then for each DUI arrest, they want to know what your consumption history was leading up to that DUI. So say you had a DUI on January 1st of 2004. Well, they're going to want to know exactly what your patterns were, and you have to walk them through that for the 12 months leading up to it. So January 1st, 2003, all the way through your arrest on January 1st, 2004. How often would you drink? What would you drink? How much would you drink? So not just how often, like 3 days a week, but how much would you consume, and what type was it, right? How many drinks did it take you to become intoxicated? And again, your answers really, really matter. And people have a tendency to downplay this. I just drank a little bit, right? But you have past evaluations. You had an evaluation from back in 2004, and you don't remember what you said back then, but it's there on paper. And so it needs to be very, very consistent. How often would you drink in excess of your average? How often would you drink to the point of intoxication? You have to answer those questions for every single DUI. Then, once you've gotten through that DUI history there, they're going to ask you generally, what drug or alcohol-related symptoms have you ever experienced? So I'm just going to rattle them off, and you, in the hearing, have to answer yes or no. So again, just for context here, if you have a lawyer, you will have gone through these, and your lawyer knows that these answers are all very consistent with the paperwork. If you're on your own, you're going to have to dig through your own paperwork, figure out not only what these mean, but also really what is the correct answer for you. Have you ever had a hangover? Have you ever had an increased tolerance to drugs or alcohol? Have you ever blacked out? Have you ever lost control? In other words, control of how much you are drinking. Have you ever had withdrawal symptoms or any family history of alcoholism or drug abuse? Have you ever passed out? Have you ever binge drank? You need to know what that is. Have you ever had any concerns or complaints from family members or employers about your consumption? Have you ever experienced social problems, family problems, medical problems, psychological problems? Did you yourself ever have a problem with alcohol? Well, trick question, right? What do you think? Did you ever spend an excessive amount of time consuming alcohol, excessive amount of money? And how do you know what excessive is? Excessive is a relative term, right? So you need to kind of, think through that and know your answer. You ever experienced work problems at home or school? Any criminal history that is drug or alcohol related? Well, yeah, you have DUI arrests, but what else is there? And then any other drugs they'll get into, right? If you ever smoked, if it's a DUI for alcohol, have you ever smoked cannabis? Have you ever, done cocaine, any other drugs, right? They're going to try to get into those, and because your evaluation got into those. And so what are your answers? And they're consistent. Let's keep going. Once you've gotten through that, they're going to ask you about treatment. Right? You did treatment in preparation for this hearing, possibly. You did treatment after each and every DUI, almost certainly. So what have you learned from treatment? What are the effects of alcohol in the body? Do you know? Did you learn that in treatment? What is alcoholism or drug addiction, right? The idea of someone being dependent versus someone who abuses it. Are you yourself an alcoholic or a drug addict? What is alcohol abuse? Did you abuse alcohol? If so, what were the causes of that, right? And you can't just say like, oh, you have to get into details. What were the causes of your drug or alcohol abuse? What lifestyle changes have you made since in order to ensure you no longer abuse alcohol? Those can be things like changing your friends, changing your location, your interests, your hobbies, your, support groups, things like that. Lots and lots of questions and answers about the treatment that you had. And this all assumes that you are not high-risk dependent. It assumes that you are not an alcoholic or an addict. If you are, you have a whole extra section to complete. And that has to do with sort of you and your history and the triggers that have caused you to, relapse over if you have or get to the point where you're at now. And you got to know now, how are things different? Like you are an alcoholic or a drug addict. You're open with that. You've done things to treat yourself. Otherwise, if you haven't done anything to treat yourself, you're not getting a license, right? But assuming you're here in this hearing, you have. What happens now when one of those triggers, those things you've identified, occur? They happen, right? If it was, let me make something up off the top of my head here, right? I began drinking years ago because I had financial issues. Okay, well, it's reasonable to believe that you're going to have financial issues again in your life. Most people do. So how are you going to deal with it when your, car breaks down, your water heater, goes out, whatever, right? You have to be able to answer that question and not in a surface level way, like, oh, I just won't drink, right? Well, that's not an acceptable answer. You need to get into the details with them. And that's where these things get really, really hard. If you're high-risk dependent, you also have to talk in detail about your support program, AA, some religious group, things like that. Whatever your support program is, it can be an informal program like a group of friends, family, something like that. But when did you start? How frequently do you meet with them? Are they open or closed meetings in the case of AA? Do you have a sponsor? How long have you had a sponsor? How often do you see your sponsor? How often do you speak with your sponsor? Crazy amount of questions to answer. If so, what are the steps in AA? There's very, very specific defined steps. And if you've been through AA and you've completed it for any length of time, you know what they are. So they're going to try to trip you up. And so you cannot easily fake this. And so what are the steps? Which is the hardest step that you found? What's the easiest step that you found? What is the 12th step? Have you chaired meetings? Do you have sponsees, the people that you have now sponsored? Have you told your own story in public, which is something that happens at AA? Have you had emergency calls with your sponsor? Any attended social activities with any members? Brought newcomers? Will you attend for the rest of your life? Could you drink safely in the future? Trick question. If you are an alcoholic, you cannot drink safely in the future. Does AA help you remain abstinent, and how? These questions, guys, if you are determined at this hearing, at the evaluation to be dependent, either an alcoholic or a drug addict, you absolutely can still get a license. But you absolutely never will get a license if you are trying to fake these things. They know. They do back to back to back. They do, each hearing officer does probably 8 hearings in a day. And they do it every day, 5 days a week. They know their stuff, and you need to as well. That's, again, a benefit of having a lawyer, but you can do this on your own. I want you to be able to do this on your own, but it's not easy. If it's a non-traditional group, in other words, it's not AA or NA, and you just have a church group or something that helps you remain abstinent, that can be accepted, but you, again, have to get into the details. Who's there? How often? What do you discuss? Tons of questions, similar questions related to that. Are you overwhelmed yet? Because there's a lot. It is not easy to get a license back, but it is really, really possible. It can be done. And these are the things you need to pause and think through and figure out and get really honest to goodness answers to if you're ever going to have a successful hearing. Now, say you get through all that, and now you're applying for a permit. Because remember, we've talked in past videos how you are likely requesting a full reinstatement of your driver's license. But in the alternative, the relief that you are seeking is, on a restricted driving permit. And that restricted driving permit is for very specific reasons. Things like employment, to attend your support groups, medical appointments, attend education, drive to school. And so you need to give details there and to show that hardship. It can't be mere inconvenience. Everyone without a license is inconvenienced. You have to show something a lot more than that, and that it rises to the level of being a hardship. And so if it's employment, then you got to talk about where are you employed? How many miles from home is it? What are the days? What are the hours? How do you get there? What is your current means of transportation to get to and from work? How would your life be impacted if you were to have a license? And how is it impacted now that you don't? That is the hardship that you must display. And you have to do this for every single exemption, every single reason that you're applying for. So if you're applying to attend your AA meetings and employment, well, you got to get into the details that I just went through. Also, they're going to ask you about other driving related offenses. Since you've been revoked, have you ever been stopped by police? You got to be honest. They have your driving record. Did you get any tickets? All those details, right? Why were you driving? How many other times have you been caught driving while you were revoked, right? What is the last time that you drove? I've gotten all the way to this point before and people screw it up. Like, I haven't driven since the DUI. Really? Well, you've got this case, this ticket, that was received after the DUI. Oh, well, I forgot, right? You're just digging yourself here a deep, deep hole that's going to be really difficult to climb out of. And so that is a quick overview. There's a lot there. I will share this with you. And what really matters is not the questions, because these are the questions. Whether you have an attorney or you go in there by yourself, these are roughly the questions that are going to be asked of you. It's the answers that matter. And so you need to write out those answers to every single question. You need to memorize it. You need to practice it. You need to think of other angles. You need to verify. Here's my answer. Well, let me look through my paperwork, my evaluation, my treatment, my past, arrests, everything, and confirm that the answer I'm giving matches the history, matches the evaluation. Because again, any inconsistency is a basis for denial. All right. Now you've gotten through this evaluation. It lasted about an hour, this hearing rather. It's lasted about an hour or so. You feel relieved that you are done, but you have no idea if you're going to get approved. Your attorney doesn't even know. Now, we're pretty good, do enough of these, we're pretty good at guessing, right? But we don't even know if you've been approved. The Secretary of State has 90 days to get an answer out to you. That's a long time. That's a long wait. And like we've talked about in past videos, you're going to get one of three answers. You're either going to get an approval for a full driver's license, full reinstatement. You're going to get flat out denied, nothing. Or you can get a restricted driving permit. So there's sort of one of those three things may happen. If you are, let's start with the good news first. You are approved for a full reinstatement of your license. You're going to need to clear all those other yeses if you haven't already, all those other things that can be holding up your license. If you don't know what I'm talking about, go back and watch the video about driving abstracts. So you have to clear everything up. You're going to need to get SR22 insurance. And if there's any other requirements, that's going to be included in the letter. But congratulations, that's best case scenario, you have a license. If you get a restricted driving permit, again, they're going to tell you everything you must do. You got to clear up any other tickets, any other issues. You got to get SR22, and you will have to get a BAID device installed in your car, a breath alcohol interlock ignition device, breathalyzer that gets installed in your car. And while you have that restricted driving permit, you must drive that vehicle with that device. Obviously, you have to blow to start the vehicle. You cannot blow with any alcohol in your system. That would be a reason to no longer have a restricted driving permit. So there's a lot of things you need to do, and you have to actually drive that vehicle. You can't just get the permit and not drive. You have to actually drive a minimum amount of time. You have to actually use it, and you can't get any tickets. You have to be using it within the permitted, times and locations and everything. But the good news here is, one, you get to do the things that you've requested to do. You can now drive to work. Right? You can now go to your meetings or medical appointments or whatever the things that you were approved to do. So it's a huge, huge improvement on your life. A restricted driving permit is awesome. It's a great step. And it's also the next step to getting that full reinstatement. So after you've completed the required time on a restricted driving permit, and it can vary depending on your history, but after you've completed that time with that BAID device in your car, no issues, you are driving without a problem, then you can go back for another hearing with another evaluation. Many of these questions asked again. Now, there are some shortcuts to simplify it. That's the benefit of a lawyer. But you can have another hearing where you're restricted driving after a restricted driving permit, and you can get a full reinstatement. It is very common then, assuming you did everything right, to get a full reinstatement. So that's why I tell you a restricted driving permit is a great path to a full reinstatement. But then there's this third thing that they can do after a hearing, and that is deny you outright. You can get denied for nearly any reason. Now, statutorily, you are allowed to appeal this. It's not that common. It's actually easier to just go have another hearing. You can go have another hearing. After you get denied, you can go back, have another hearing. You probably need a new evaluation. You need an update to address the reasons that you got denied. So here's my good news. If you get denied after a Secretary of State hearing, they have to tell you why. And in written form, they will tell you that you were denied for such and such and such reason. The good news is that you now know. You can address those with a new evaluation, new report, new everything, right? And you go back into that hearing, a new one, and you clear those things up. And then you wait again. You wait another 90 days, and you either get a full reinstatement or restricted driving permit, or you get denied again. And if you get denied again, it tells you the reason why. And so it is evolving each time. You're not going into a hearing blind after you've been denied. You know exactly what things you need to improve upon and address in order to have a successful hearing. All right, so in this video series, we have walked through how to get your driver's license back here in Illinois, how to have a successful Secretary of State hearing. We covered what that hearing process is like. We covered how you got here in the first place, the different reasons that your license can be revoked. We talked about eligibility. You have to be eligible to go to the Secretary of State in the first place and have that hearing. We also talked about some things that may make you ineligible. We talked about the requirements, the legwork that you have to do ahead of time. You need an evaluation, you need a full analysis of your history, and you need to do some prep work before you ever walk foot in the door. We talked a bit about how you request this hearing, where you can have these hearings. We talked about whether or not you may need an informal or a formal hearing. There is a difference. Also, out-of-state hearings that you can do. So we talked about the different type of hearing that you may need, and then all the paperwork. We talked about evaluations, the treatment needs assessment. We talked about all the things that have to be done before that hearing. We talked about what happens actually in that hearing, whether it's formal or informal. I went through every question that you need to be prepared for, every answer that you need to have ready to go at that hearing. And finally, we talked about what happens next. What happens when you finally get that answer 90 days later? Are you approved? Are you denied? What are you approved for? Why were you denied? All those things are going to be given to you about 90 days after the hearing, and that will determine, one, whether or not you got that license or permit, and if not, two, then what exactly you need to do, how you go back to the drawing board and have a successful hearing, because you can do this. I know you can. Now, if you have questions about this, or you've determined, like, I do want some help with this, this is something that our office does. You can contact us and we can go through this process or pick up part of this process for you in order to get you to that finish line of getting your driver's license back. Thanks for watching.